Hail, and welcome back to my channel, and also welcome back to the Gods and Goddesses series on my channel. Today we are discussing another Germanic/Norse deity. We are discussing the god Yngvi Frey, or Frey, or Freyr. He is the individual whose rune I am currently being initiated into, the rune of Yngvas, or the rune of peace, harmony, male sexuality, etc., etc. And no, before you ask, that is not why I am shirtless. I am, as I have outlined in my Lagus video, in a bit of a predicament in that my AC is broken and I live in the middle of the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. So my last two videos, which I recorded on Morgan and on Inari, were recorded with a shirt on, which resulted in me being highly overheated afterwards and completely soaked. So to avoid that unpleasantness, I am today recording without a shirt on, with my camera conveniently aimed at my face. So, my apologies. I know you are not used to that. It is not because I want to, show off, or because it is thematic with this particular video or god that I am recording with on here. But yeah, no, that's the reason why I am without a shirt today. So, thank you for understanding. Thank you for not being bothered by it. All right. So, like I said, Yngvi Frey, the god Frey, I will refer to him as Frey hereafter. That is F-R-E-Y. The Anglo-Saxon rune poem says the following, and we will likely be discussing this in my next Elder Fufark Rune Divination 101 video, which is of course my initiation into the rune Yngva's conclusion. It says, Yng was first seen by men among the East Danes, till followed by his chariot he departed eastwards over the waves. So the Herdingas named the hero. So, Yngvi Frey, he is a hero, it says here. He is a deity who was first seen among the East Danes. However, he was a deity that was most popular among the Swedes, and we will be getting into that a little bit later on in this video. Now, I consider Yngvi Frey actually one of my more favorite deities. He is someone that I find pleasant to interact with. He is someone who well, the rune that I am currently being initiated into is showing me various aspects of him that I appreciate. Part of that is because probably I am a individual who is a male, so that might be why I find the attributes and traits that he stands for to be very pleasant and relatable, I guess. Much like I have here heard many women say that Freya is of a similar nature to them, which makes sense because she represents the feminine aspect of sexuality, of womanhood, etc., etc., whereas her brother, because Frey is of course the twin brother of the goddess Freya, he is the masculine aspect of that same sphere, shall we call it, from now on. So he is the son of the sea god Njord. They are all three of them, Njord, Frey, and Freya, are all of the tribe of the Vanir. That is to say, they are all fertility gods and earth deities, or related to the earth, fertility, bounty, harvest, sexual energy, stuff like that. So historically, he is actually considered, like Njord and Freya, a part of the Aesir tribe of gods, and this is for the following reasons, which I have already discussed in my very first video in this series on the god Njord, who I have also extensively worked with as part of my Lagus initiation. They are considered part of the Aesir because they were exchanged as prisoners or hostages, or what will you, after the Aesir-Vanir War was concluded. They were basically exchanged in return for other prisoners from the Aesir, and who were then to live with the Vanir. So Njord, Frey, and Freya were given as hostages, and afterwards were thus considered part of the Aesir, even though they come originally from the tribe of the Vanir. Now, Frey is said to be a title, actually, rather than his actual name. So Frey means Lord. It is just that simple. Frey means Lord. So Lord Yngvi Frey, or Lord Yngvi, or however you want to address him from here on out. Which is very suitable, because he is the Lord of Alfheim, the home of the Light Elves. He has a wife whose name is Gerfr, or Gerður, I suppose, depending on how you pronounce it. Excuse me, my Old Norse is not the best on the planet. I'm Dutch, not Scandinavian, so who is often said to have connections to the earth, much like Frey himself. And the reasons for Frey's connection to the earth we will be, again, discussing a little further on in this video. So Frey is also linked to several magical artifacts or constructs, the first of them being a boar created for him by the dwarves, called Gullinbursti, which roughly translates to gold mane. And it is a being that is said to light the way for its owner. Which is fitting because this boar was said to be a being who had a glowing golden mane which would illuminate the area in dark places. So in that sense you could also think of Frey, which is very fitting and an aspect that we will likely be getting more into during my initiatory video on the rune Yngvas, as a sort of a light bringer, hope giver, which is indeed part of the aspect of the rune Yngvas, that leads people on, that gives them hope, that gives them courage, that gives them strength, that gives them inner peace and perseverance in darker times, in times where it seems like you just have to struggle and fight to claw out of a certain predicament that you find yourself in. He sometimes also rides this boar, as is mentioned in the Eddas, where he is said to ride the boar to Baldur's funeral. And the boar is also evidently capable of traversing water and air, meaning that it apparently can walk on water, and it can apparently also fly. He is in possession of a magical ship that will have favorable winds, so it is said, no matter where the person in possession of the ship goes, where it can basically stir itself, it can go wherever it pleases despite the wind that is currently blowing, no matter the direction in which that wind is currently blowing. One awesome aspect about this particular ship is that it can apparently be folded to the point where it can fit into a pouch. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, Frey has a sword, and so far I have not really been able to find a name for this sword. But it is mentioned in the Eddas, and that he has this sword and that it is supposed to be capable of fighting giants or Jotun all on its own. And he ended up, interestingly enough, trading this sword to marry the Jotun Gerður, or Gerfer. So this sword is said to radiate like the sun, or some indeed would say that the sun itself shines from the sword. And I find this a very interesting trade-off, because eventually, because Frey trades this sword off in return for the marriage of Gerver, with Gerver, I should say, he trades the sword off, and in so doing he dooms perhaps not just himself, but also the rest of the world. It was Frey's fate to fight Surtr, the fire giant who would end up consuming the world in flames at Ragnarok, who was to be the opponent of Frey during Ragnarok, and Frey perhaps would have won this battle if it weren't for the fact that Frey, well, traded away his sword to be with the woman whom he desired to be with. And that, in my mind, actually very clearly also demonstrates that sometimes people who are in love, that they sometimes do very stupid things, that they sometimes do very foolish things. Now, you could say, how dare you say that about a deity? But I think what this story, this myth, is meant to illustrate is exactly that. People do crazy things for love. And Yngvi Frey, being the god of male sexuality, of masculine energy, of you know, doing things to impress the women we love. I find that to be a very interesting thing, because I can actually recognize my own tendencies to do stupid shit for women who have perhaps not deserved it. But in this case, that is of course not to say that Gerfer did not deserve to, you know, have him trade that sword. I'm just saying that I find it a relatable story in that sense. Because it is, in some cases, something that comes at great cost to us, that we do stupid stuff to impress individuals that we perhaps find attractive, that we wish to perhaps woo through our actions, and that we are willing to pay great prices for, and whether this price is justified or warranted is left up to the individual to decide, I suppose. However, one could, of course, think that in so doing, in this case, Frey would have a great responsibility that he, in this case, traded away, because without his sword he was not adequately able to defend himself against Surtr, and because he was not able to defeat Surtr, therefore, the rest of the world would go on to be consumed. So again, I find this a very interesting display of what love can do to a person's mindset, and that this is absolutely not in the discrediting of Frey, of course, nor would I say that Frey is a foolish deity. It is merely to illustrate that, well, sometimes people do stupid shit for love, I guess, and that is of course part of his sphere, part of his domain, to preside over that, or at least a portion of that. So, which takes me then to the rest of the spheres of influence that Frey has. Frey is a god of the harvest. He is a lord of the earth, a god of fertility, of abundance, of wealth in a variety of manners, including in love and finance, by the way, of masculine energy, of masculine sexuality, like I have already outlined, which was historically depicted through Frey's depictions of his statues with an enormous phallus. You can actually, if you look at pictures online, you can actually find pictures of that. There are plenty of replicas that you can probably find in your local metaphysical store. I know that I have certainly seen several statues of Frey that are copied from those old findings that depict that. So depending on how comfortable you are with such imagery, you could perhaps, as we will discuss later on, perhaps give that as an offering to Frey to dedicate to him in that sense. So he is a deity that presides over peace, over harmony, as the rune Yngwas, as we will discuss in that particular video once it is time for me to make that, that he presides over those spheres of influence where he can bring inner peace, especially, is so far my understanding of his rune. Where he brings a change of perspective, a harmonious understanding of not just yourself, but also of the situations that you find yourself in, but also of the events around you and how you fit into the big picture of events that are unfolding around you, and perhaps where you are a part of said events, or if you are merely swept away in the tide, like I was with my Lagos initiation, where certain negative things happened, such as the breaking of the Aesir, which I was very clearly informed by Njord was part of a curse that was part of a initiation that I was meant to deal with in terms of remedying it through the healing powers of Lagos, but not before it swept away everything that I that I wanted to hold on to in this sense. Frey has a holiday associated with him. It is called Frey Faxi. To go back on my initiation into Lagos and the transition into Yngwas, it was at the very beginning, after the end of my Lagos initiation, that the holiday of Frey Faxi came. Really, honestly, just perfectly timed. A couple days after my initiation into Lagos ended, perfectly timed. Frey Faxi came around. My roommate did a ritual for me to finalize my healing baths, as I have already outlined in my Lagos video. But for those of you who are perhaps just tuning in or who did not watch that video, this is something that I found very peculiar because Frey, Lord of the Harvest, it was a harvest holiday, and curse finally undone, abundance, wealth, finance finally able to once again flow freely, as this curse on all areas, on all levels of my existence, basically was preventing me from truly having and especially holding on to. So the energy of the rune Yngwas basically came in with a blast, as the rune is of course also an orgasmic energy, or specifically male orgasmic force. And in this case, this was also included in a ritual where I had to do some sex magic to also further facilitate, by myself by the way, to further facilitate the removal of the curse. The holiday of Frey Faxi is sometimes also called the Loaf Feast, and like I said, it is a harvest holiday, which is, as I mentioned, very fitting regarding the spheres of influence in which over which Frey has dominion. Frey was also said to keep horses, which were sacred animals, and an animal associated, of course, with fertility, strength, swiftness, and so the horse, and therefore the rune Yngwas, also has a connection to him. which is fitting, as Ewas can represent, of course, the connectivity between two spouses, or perhaps more spouses if you are so inclined. Frey is also associated with kingship and was said to be the founder of the Yngling dynasty, a Swedish lineage. And indeed, like I said earlier, it is for this reason, perhaps, that he was very popular among the Swedes back in the day. And in my personal experience, from interacting with him through rituals, through just, talking to him, invoking him, evoking him, Frey is a very easygoing individual. He's very relaxed, very chill, as you would expect from someone whose rune is called the Rune of Peace and Harmony. He is a very friendly individual in my particular understanding, in my particular interactions with him. Much like his father Njord, really, which is interesting because I would describe Freya also as a friendly individual, and, well, I mean, personally I like my women a little, tough, a little straightforward, so I don't have a problem with it personally, but compared to Frey and Njord, she could be perceived by some people, I imagine, as somewhat sterner, somewhat more straight to the point in that sense, which I found interesting. But regardless, attributes and traits that I find very fitting, like I said, for a deity who presides over happiness, over joy, over peace, harmony, abundance, bounty, harvest celebrations, etc. Frey represents, in my opinion, healthy, proper, good masculinity. No matter who you are, no matter what perhaps your orientation might be, because I believe in modern times, actually, it should be mentioned that Frey and Gerver are actually kind of said to be patrons of individuals who have perhaps alternative sexual orientations. So if you are someone who is not heterosexual, perhaps, you may find Frey a very appealing patron or a comforter in that sense. That is something that I want to give those of you who are not straight to. Perhaps you can turn to them to find comfort, to find, especially if you are a male who is of a other than heterosexual orientation, regardless of what that may be, you may find it a inspiration to know that you can still, harness that masculine energy, no matter your origins, no matter your feelings, no matter your stance, etc. He is as evident from the Poetic Edda. From the Poetic Edda as a capable fighter. He is someone who is willing to stand up for his beliefs, of course. He is willing to fight regardless of the odds, which I think is a very healthy masculine trait, to fight for what you believe in, to make sacrifices for the things that you want. This is of course reflected also in Odin, in Heimdall, who both sacrificed to the Well of Urd to gain knowledge, to gain insight, to gain inspiration, and to do what is necessary to get the job done for the betterment of not just themselves, but also of the people that they lead, that they preside over. He's a very patient, even-tempered individual. He is not excessively quick to anger, in my experience. In fact, I've never even seen him angry. I wouldn't even really say that I have ever actually talked to him where he seemed extremely disappointed in anything or anything of the sort. He is a very balanced, even-tempered individual, shall we say. And that is not to say that those who are perhaps a bit more on the angry side, such as Thor, who I also very well connect with, that they are less masculine, or that it is an unhealthy masculinity, of course, but I am just saying that it is an expression of a calm, collected individual who expresses his masculinity in various ways that are not, as our modern American Western culture so often associates with, aggression necessarily. And again, that is not to say that Frey does not know how to express aggression, of course, because there are plenty of stories where he fights other beings and even slays some of them, slays other gods. But to actually get back on the story of the sword that he trades away. After he trades away his sword, fights with an antler. Now, an antler, of course, is a symbol of the elk, of various antlered animals that are also symbols of fertility, usually. So there again we see that fertility aspect, and he uses it to fight, which I find very interesting. And in some cases he actually wins while using that antler, except against Surt, where he once again tries to fight Surt, but in that event, as a result of not having a sword, unfortunately loses. So that is of course the prophecy of Ragnarok, and the interpretation that I always have of Ragnarok is that it is a cyclical event. It is not a set in stone linear event that is yet to happen. It is something that just happens again and again and again in a symbolic sense. But I will leave it up to the viewer, you, to interpret things however you please, desire, wish, whatever. So in terms of what Frey can do for the magician when called on, and with the appropriate sacrifices and exchanges of course being presented, because a gift for a gift is our way. It is not the case that we fall on our knees and start praying and then magically expect things to just happen without our own input, of course. He can do a wide variety of things, really. To start, as a fertility god, he can assist with, affairs of love, romance, sex. He can assist with finding a suitable spouse, again, regardless of orientation. Much like his sister Freya, or even just help with becoming more attractive to other individuals if you just want to, have sexual activities. He can help a male in particular, of course, to be the best version of himself that he can be, that he wants to be, that he is ready to develop into. And of course this will likely be a process that happens in stages. It is a process that happens in degrees, of course. It is not something that just boom happens when you talk to Frey and I want to be the best one that I can be, the best father, the best husband, the best, okay, great, that probably will happen with his assistance, but it's not going to happen overnight. Please do be aware of that. And again, I personally have a contract with Freya to find myself a suitable woman, not with Frey, because with Frey I more work to achieve my own self-development, because as a male I feel that is more applicable, of course, for obvious reasons. He can, in that sense, actually, when it is regarding masculinity, perhaps because you have damage from past relationships, perhaps because you are different from most men, perhaps because you are, in some way, shape, or form, wounded in your psyche, in your pride, in your ego, in your masculinity. Perhaps you had a very, overbearing mother that completely trampled you into the dirt. Perhaps you had a past spouse that completely ruined your self-esteem. Stuff like that. Frey can help with healing, mending, and otherwise assisting in overcoming such obstacles, such mental blockages, such emotional and energetic blockages even. In the case of perhaps mental, erectile issues where you are afraid of performance, where you are worried that you need to live up to expectations to the point where you can actually not perform, Frey can also help you to facilitate and unlock your confidence, where you can, to that end, start letting go of worry and stress and all that stuff, to the point, of course, that you enjoy sex for what it is, which is an enjoyable activity, rather than something that is placing tremendous amounts of strain and stress and anxiousness on you. So this is, of course, this kind of healing is always best suited for the mental and psychological issues in nature, but I suppose that if you wish to give it a shot, that you could attempt to contact him for more physical related issues. Again, however, as always, I have to say, please consult your physician, psychologist, etc., etc., if you are dealing with issues, because there is always, in such cases, a need for professional help in that sense. So I do want to, of course, always say that to individuals who may be considering working with magic. Use it as a supplement, use it as something that is, well, like I said, on the side, that can assist, that can perhaps work with you on that level. But if there is a need for mental or physical treatment, do please seek that out. Frey can assist with enhancing one's finances, manipulating events involving finance, wealth, in such a manner that is going to cause a favorable outcome in terms of such things. I could actually tell you various stories of successful financial endeavors that have come about as a result of a relatively small contract that I had with Frey for a while until things happened which forced me to close down that particular contract and change it to something else, which had nothing to do, by the way, with Frey or anything, or that he was displeased with me. It was merely because I could, because of various circumstances, no longer specifically fulfill those bargains that I made with him. So I said, of course, like, I know it's been going on, I know I have not been able to fulfill this, so let's close it down. And he was like, okay, sure, fine, what do you want to do with it? I'm like, well, let's change it to something else, and that something else is now fortunately elaborated upon, significantly assisting me with my initiation into Yngwas, as such things go. I find it very interesting how one's life, when one is initiated into these runes, including in the rune of Yngwas, as I am currently being right now, that your life is basically just led in certain directions. Runes before now that have led up to this particular point, and here you actually do see the gradual initiation from rune to rune and how they all tie into each other and into the gods that they represent or that preside over these runes, of course. Because I have said many times, the runes are even beyond the gods because they are universal forces, but we have deities, of course, who preside over the runes, who can mentor individuals who are being initiated into said runes to get the most out of it, to tap into it the most, etc. So to this end, to the end of finances, you can assist with protecting and empowering businesses, other sources of income. Perhaps if you work in the field of agriculture, he could be someone who could very easily be called upon for the assistance with, getting a good harvest, getting good prices for your crops, stuff like that. And due to his association with peace and harmony, Frey can also be called on to create a more, like I mentioned earlier, a more harmonious attitude within the self, which in turn, of course, will assist the magician with manifestation, to manifest positivity, to attract positive things, because once your inner world, of course, and this is Magic 101 really, or even Magic 100, I guess, because it is the very foundation of magic. And it is not as easy as it sounds, but it is, of course, the very building block of magic. That once the internal workings are changed, the law of attraction dictates that when you put out positive energy, positive things are going to be coming to you, because that is what the universe reflects back to you, because you are now vibrating on a different frequency. So that is something to keep in mind. Frey can help you change yourself, and thus in turn help you change your reality, change your surrounding experiences, your external experiences, and as a result, therefore, also, again, your internal interpretation of these external experiences. And in that sense, peace and harmony can, of course, be achieved. Now, what I do think, however, is that perhaps you could call on him, and I have not yet personally worked with him to this end, by the way, so I'm going to offer you that up as a possible suggestion, not as something that I have particularly worked with him on. I imagine that you could, if you are, for example, harassed at work, which is causing you great distress, I suppose, you could potentially ask him if he could perhaps help you with remedying that situation in a more direct sense, to bring about, peace and harmony, for example. And again, this is a suggestion. I am not sure if that would work or if he would agree to that, but this is something that you could experiment with, I suppose. In that sense, he also can, of course, assist with collaborating with other individuals in a very peaceful and harmonious manner that brings about positive change to not only yourself, but to other individuals and to situations as a whole. Lastly, and perhaps of course most of interest to the magician that is interested in self-actualization, ascension, initiation, etc., Yngwas, being the rune of self-actualization, of course, dictates that the self is being actualized, that all remaining things that are negative, that are hindering us, that are blockages, that reside currently still within us, that are to be stripped away, transmuted where necessary, however necessary, that they be changed for the better, and that they be transmuted into something like turning lead into gold, as the alchemical principle symbolically states. That you change for the better, that you become a better person, that you become a more powerful magician, that you therefore will be better able to handle life, that you therefore will be able to better practice your spells, perform your spells, put out your intent, send it out into the world, with the point of course, eventually ascending and becoming the god of your own reality. Because, make no mistake, as the initial poem that I just cited said, that Yngvi Frey was a great hero, first seen among the East Danes. Now, I have a video of Bragi coming up, and I have mentioned this in previous videos that I have done. I very strongly believe that many of our particular deities of the Germanic/Norse pantheon, that they were at one point human beings, such as, for example, Odin. I strongly suspect that Odin was, once upon a time, in a distant past, a human shaman that perhaps ascended to become a deity. And so too do I draw from the rune poem that I read in the beginning, that, as I have mentioned before, Yngvi Frey would have been the founder of the line of kings of the Swedes. That he was at one time a human being that ascended to be deified. Now, all you left-hand path practitioners, of course, already are likely on this kind of a path and already accept this as something that is good and right and something that you are striving for. Now, perhaps those of you who walk more on the right-hand path of things, and I myself walk the middle way, although I am no stranger to the fact that I likely lean more towards the left-hand path, you may find this abhorrent. I very strongly disagree with that. I do not think that this is in any way, shape, or form a crime. I do not think that this is not humble, because you have to realize that being a deity or becoming a deity, that you pursuing this, what are your goals with this? Why do you want to be that? It will require you, of course, to have others recognize you as such. It will require that you are, whether these be spirit or incarnate, human, or of whatever variety those beings that recognize you as such are. Because it does not, in my understanding, necessarily have to be in the physically incarnate world that one has to be recognized as such for you to be recognized as a deity, I suppose, if that makes sense. But it is something that I find peculiar, because you say that it is not humble to want to be a deity, but you are forgetting that being a deity requires a lot of responsibility on the part of the deity. It requires you to answer prayers, to look after your followers. It requires you to do this and that, and to claim responsibility for shit that you maybe not even do, you may get blamed for this or that is not actually your fault. So these are all things that you have to keep in mind. It is really not as glamorous. It is a responsibility that you take on, and that is something that I think many of the right-hand path practitioners do not understand. They think it is, oh, it's arrogant. No, it's not arrogant. It is a job, a position that you are striving for, and that you therefore then need to assume responsibility for once you have achieved that. So that is something that I also find interesting with this particular rune, because it is about self-actualization and ascension, the becoming of a deity, as it were. Because it is said in that rune poem that eventually, after he was among the East Danes, that he took his chariot and then went east. Possible offerings to Frey, lastly. In my personal experience, as with any Germanic deity, you really can't go wrong with mead or with beer or with alcoholic beverages. However, Frey I have found, instinctively actually, because for my Frey Faxi holiday I bought a herbal beer. So I bought that, and specifically for my Frey Faxi holiday celebration, and I did not really think about it, but that is of course something that he apparently also appreciates as offering. So Bounty of the Land, as Frey is of course the god of the harvest, is also very welcomed, and we're talking about really anything from wheat to bread, to meat of a variety of nature, to beans, to nuts, to fruits, etc., etc. I have read that some people say that pork is particularly welcomed by Frey. I guess that could be drawn in relation to boar, but I would personally say that if you could get a hold of boar meat, perhaps that might be even more welcomed by Frey, I guess. Another thing that you could offer, and actually no. So if you live in the United States, as I currently do, although I am not from the United States originally, back in my home country, the Netherlands, any food that you bought in terms of vegetables and fruit would have been organic. Now I am of course very painfully aware that here in the United States, food is not usually, when you buy it in the supermarket, organic. You have to specifically buy that. So if you are a practitioner living in the United States and you wish to prepare a meal for Frey, or you wish to in some way, shape or form purchase something for him as offering, even if that offering is just as is without further preparation, which is fine, I would recommend, if you have the money, of course, that you specifically invest in organic food, because that is the quote-unquote natural state of the vegetation, of the fruit, of the vegetables, etc. Again, though, if it is not within your financial budget, or if it is not within your capability for whatever reason to do that, regular produce as bought in the supermarket or wherever you buy it is, of course, acceptable. Another thing, visual art, audible art, etc., all sorts of art really are, in my experience, acceptable to Frey. In fact, one of the things that I have promised Frey is that I would, before a certain time, make a painting or drawing of, because I am a visual artist, where I would make a drawing or painting, like I said, of Frey and Gerdur. So that is something that I still need to get on, but I will absolutely get on and very, very shortly. So, a statue of a boar, a statue of a ship, a statue maybe even of a sword, or perhaps a sword itself, I imagine would be interesting offerings for Frey. Bells, historically, where if you read about certain accounts historically that were written about the practitioners of Frey, or the worshippers of Frey, the priests of Frey, whatever you want to call them, they would use bells in their services to Frey. So a bell would be a perfectly acceptable offering to Frey, I imagine. You can buy plenty of those in metaphysical stores. You can probably find those in sections and stores like that associated with Buddhism, with Hinduism, or just generic bells, etc. You can probably find that in your local metaphysical store, or perhaps even on Amazon. Statues of horses, because they are sacred animals to Frey, would also be acceptable and welcomed. An antler that could also be devoted and dedicated, perhaps with meaningful runes carved into it, or portions of an antler if you can't afford the whole thing, would also very much, of course, be appreciated, as this is also a symbol of Frey, of course, in the sagas where it is mentioned that he fights with an antler against his foes. It is an idea that you could carve runes into perhaps an antler, or perhaps something meaningful to you, to Frey, that you could carve into them with perhaps a Dremel or something along those lines, and you could then use it as an altarpiece. A statue of Frey, like I mentioned in the beginning, whether with phallus or not, depending on the purposes for which you use it or what you were comfortable with, I suppose, is also perfectly acceptable and welcomed. So if you want to offer incense, I would go with earthy, natural themes, such as incense scented after fruits, after flowers, trees, earth, etc. Personally, I'm a fan of offering him pine incense, or just regular quote-unquote pagan incense. I don't know, I just love the smell of the pine trees, and I just feel that that is a very nice offering to give. In terms of candles, I would find the colors that are associated with earth again, green, brown to represent earth, harvest, vegetation, fruits, etc. Yellow is also, of course, a very good color. It is happiness, it is sunshine, it is peace, harmony, confidence. So orange might also be actually an interesting color, and in that sense also red for sexual energy. Pink, in that sense, for love energy, for sexual energy. Again, matters of love would be especially suited to provide such offerings to him. Blue, actually, because he is also said to be Lord of the Rain, and now if you notice a pattern here, a good harvest was historically, of course, brought about by good earth, good tilled earth. I'm not a farmer, I'm not a person who works in the agricultural field, so excuse me if it sounds a little basic, but you would have, of course, good fertile soil. You would have rain to water your crops, or perhaps watering them in some other manner. Sunshine to provide nutrition and nourishment, and that would, of course, altogether yield, with proper care, a good harvest. So these are all colors that are associated with that particular cycle and that particular theme. So blue would be a good representation of healing in that sense, but also, of course, with if you choose to approach him for a healing, as I mentioned in the beginning, or earlier in this video, I should say, if that is healing of your relationship, healing of the inner self, healing of your masculine energies, etc., etc. Blue is a very strong color for healing magic in general, so providing an offering for Frey in that sense is also a very welcome gift. So I think that about covers and wraps up my entire video on the Lord Yngvi Frey, or the Lord Yngvi, or Frey, or Freyr. So thank you all so much for watching. After this, I will likely be uploading a video on the god Heimdall, the Watcher god, and I hope to catch you all in that next video. Thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you like the content, and I will see you, as I said, in the next video. Hail!